Regarding human superpowers, I believe that you believe they're real.
Oh, yes. I have seen enough. That's why the subtitle of the most recent book was First-Hand Experience with Things That Can't Happen.
Yes, well, that's the one I'm reading at the moment, and I read it late into the night and just really couldn't stop reading it, but I had to put it down eventually. This film, Push.
Oh, yeah.
That's how I discovered you. And I really liked the film, but of course it's quite out there. But because I'm somebody who's experienced these type of abilities in my own life, I always felt very frustrated that it was so denied by the mainstream. And then I came to the specials, and there you were. And I watched your documentary over and over and over, and it was just like such a breath of fresh air, somebody with your background and status.
Which documentary? I mean, there's a number out there.
They put it on this DVD. It was
the one that's with that, yeah.
The
science behind the,
Yeah, and it was basically you talking, but it was well made, and I was absolutely wrapped, and you sort of blew me out. I mean, to think that you guys were doing this back in the 70s with Task Force Delta, and so that gave me a big blast. And I don't know if it was before or after I saw the Men Who Stare at Goats, and I guess I realized that it was based upon you and Jim Shannon, and I'm wary of Hollywood versions of things, so I sort of took it all with a grain of salt. But yeah, that's why I was really excited to talk to you, because you're exactly my sort of person, with a military background, a police background, a scientific background, but also extremely open-minded. I just wanted to start. I've got questions. I sent you a little list, but if I could just ask your opinions. Regarding human superpowers, I believe that you believe they're real.
Oh, yes. I have seen enough. That's why the subtitle of the most recent book was First-Hand Experience with Things That Can't Happen.
Yes, well, that's the one I'm reading at the moment, and I read it late into the night and just really couldn't stop reading it, but I had to put it down eventually. Just briefly, why do you think these truths are so vehemently denied by the scientific mainstream and, the academic mainstream?
Well, the basic issue are worldviews. They come from a materialistic worldview that we can chop things into smaller and smaller pieces. And we got to the Higgs boson, and then you found out there were pentaquarks below that. And the one problem that they usually had was like remote viewing and that. They say, well, it's got to be electromagnetic or something like that until you perturbate time. And, you have precognition, retrocognition and things. You go like, no, that doesn't allow for a standing wave of some kind, frankly. Well, it varies, but I think, the hardcore deniers, I won't even call them skeptics, but if we're right, their entire worldview is wrong and potentially collapses. And that would obviously be very frightening. I just did a review of this one. Called After. Bruce Grayson, and Bruce is a friend of mine. I've known him for about 40 years, and he's a psychiatrist that he's now retired from the University of Virginia, and they have the division of perceptual, but anyway, he's been studying these things and literally has thousands of cases. We have a very limited number, however, that are, excuse me, negative. And the one you were telling, or what you were telling me, it's interesting because he describes similar experiences here, although relatively rare, but where they start out with a distinct negative bend and then eventually transform.
I'll definitely check that book out, and I've heard it.
It's only been out a few weeks now.
Okay, and you've written like a foreword?
No, not for that. Long story. When he was selling the book before it was written, I wrote a blurb for him going in to tell whoever that they ought to accept the book. And now the list of the people who did blurbs is a who's who in that field. We had asked about why scientists have problems with it. You have the flip side, and that's religion, or organized religion. Probably tell the story in there, but Elizabeth, you know who Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was?
Yep.
But she was the head of my doctoral committee.
Yeah.
And basically had me change one word, and that was from religious to spiritual. And we were doing it, and that made all the difference in the world.
Yep.
I don't know how many people, because we had a survey, we crossed out, religious, or say I consider myself to be spiritual. I don't like the dogma of the church. Other people, though, do like the structure of the church, and like the ceremonies and things like that.
The socializing.
Yeah. But what I see them as, in anything where you can have a direct experience of God, such as the kind that you're in, they don't like that because they want to be the arbiter of truth. That's
it. And one of the things that made me laugh in your the documentary about you from Push was when you said they either say you're either tricking me or you've got the devil in you, or the devil did or something. And
that has been a problem in the research area. And it certainly popped up in the military, where they said, you can do that, but that's the work of the devil, so therefore we should not be involved.
You got to wonder about the IQ of people who think like that. I really don't understand how you can be that thick, because after I left the church, when I was in the church, I was sort of semi-famous, my story and abilities that people had seen me do, a little bit of healing, different things. It was like, wow, he's a great man of God. But as soon as I walked away, then I was, whoa, he's a backslidden false prophet, whatever. And I never brought people's faith down. If somebody said that, yeah. And it's funny because it's just like the Middle Ages or something. They fear it, rather than coming to me and saying, we have a discussion, Dave? Like, why did you leave the church? They're just like, oh no, he's bad, Yeah. It's funny how people are.
One of the concerns that they have right now in the U.S. is that they said that over half of the people do not identify with any religion. That has a huge implication not only for the church, but politically as well.
Well, that's the thing. What you're doing and what others are doing is so important, because humans need to know this real spiritual side. And if we don't talk, if people who know things don't talk, then the religious people get the say. They'll say, well, my religion's the right one. Those guys are bad over there. Or the total atheist says, well, there's nothing. You just dust and ashes when you die. Don't kid yourself. And that's also a terrible way to think about life, isn't it? I don't know why you'd act kindly if you're just going to be snuffed out. Well,
you wonder how many people have been killed over religion.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always fear and ignorance, and Anyway, that is true. It's really a big part of this thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you how, when you're in Task Force Delta, and was the First Earth Battalion a thing with you guys, or is that something that came later?
Okay, let me explain. Task Force Delta was a very unique organization in that there were only 5 people who were actually assigned in Delta. 3 of them were admin. And this was something Frank Burns set up. And then there were the rest of us, all of whom had day jobs and everything. And some were civilians, some, well, one of the names you'd recognize, Colin Powell, for instance, was there. He was there.
That amazed me when I read about that.
Yeah, he was a brigadier at the time. As a matter of fact, the org chart had this little core and then a series of concentric rings. And when I was at the Sloan School of Management at MIT, this was on, advanced organizational structures. When I brought that in, and they said, it would have been in the 90s, and they said, who was doing this and when? I mean, they couldn't believe that the Army would be thinking in such abstract fashion. So the point was, there was a core thing, and yes, we communicated, and then you had periodic meetings, and they did some pretty advanced stuff. Now, First Earth Battalion is not a military thing, okay? It's not a military, and a lot of people have that. And of course, in the movie, that certainly gets confused. Jimmy was a brilliant Imagineer and a great artist. And so he would think of these things, and he put together, there was a booklet called, I think you've seen it.
I, of course, have seen it. Being an artist myself, I really admire his art.
And it was used as a think tank, or a think piece, if you will, that, and one of the things, it was the originals in black and white, and the pictures aren't really even complete. And that's intentional. That was to create a generic idea, and then the people mentally fill in the blanks associated with that. And some was pretty far out, and a number of them, kind of came to fruition. There were a number of concepts that he had there that eventually actually became fielded systems, though the lineage wouldn't hook it up, but for those of us who knew about it. But what had happened is Shy Meyer was, Bernie Rogers first, and then Shy Meyer. These are 4-star generals, and coming out of Vietnam era, and the Army was broken, and they knew that. And so these guys were bright, innovative, and willing to let us explore. And it was at a time, frankly, where the budget was pretty good. And people would ask me sometimes, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a freelance colonel. You don't really have such now. But when I was working with Bert Subelbein at INSCOM and doing these things, it was, yes, I had a day job. Yes, I reported and whatnot, but I had a great deal of freedom. And I was reporting directly to the commanding general, a 2-star at INSCOM. And he was, very supportive. Having said that, it cost him his job and forced him into retirement at a later point. And that was because of the issue we were discussing before, people who were not supportive and wanted to be very conservative. There were those who did not like the remote viewing program at all. And in fact, it had to move from the Army to DIA for a while. And it was interesting because the general who replaced Bert Stubblebine did in fact get a 3rd star and go to DIA, had a religious conversion, and gets in there, and he's now saddled with this program that has some congressional support. And so we had angels on the hill, if you'd say, who were, protecting him. And you got the commanding general at the 3-star level who was adamantly opposed. And hence it finally went to, okay, we'll go to, they were trying to transfer it back to CIA. I don't know how much you know about these organizational structures, but the point is they're moving from organization to organization, and ones that do not have direct ties in general. And that's because of the adverse impact of some of the very senior people. Having said that, you've got others, like I say, we had congressional support who very much wanted the program to continue and were worried to do it. But those things are all transient. And when the heavens shift, the stars start moving and that, then you had to institutionally move. And eventually it got to a zero-sum game. That's what happened with Stargate. They wanted to move it to CIA, and the funding was coming down dramatically by that point. And actually, there was a program, Nightline, and Bob Gates was on, who was then the director of CIA. Mm-hmm. And what he said was absolutely correct, although it sounded like it was damning. And that was, we never launched an operation based solely on remote viewing data. True. What's not said that people don't know is not in the business. You never launched an operation based on one piece of data under any set of circumstances. Yeah. So while it sounded like he was totally criticizing it, he was not a fan. He did not want it back. But again, you had the congressional support, and they were willing to impact the budget. A lot of this is the golden rule, and who has the budget and control of the funds, and that's how things kind of ebb and flow.
This sort of runs into the second question I want to ask about your advice for cultivating these powers for humanity generally. My book's about this concept of the portal, which I want to sort of ask you about next. But the cultivating of these human powers, it seems to me mostly it's a random thing. And for most of us who experience these things, it's something random. If you're like me, I press in, I want to know, I keep asking questions, I read, I watch, I see somebody like yourself. But what would be your advice about developing human superpowers? These, sort of side.
Okay, well, somebody said it sounds a little bit inconsistent, and that is that it's totally random. I don't think it is random per se, though many of the events may appear to be random. But the second part of the question, how do you develop capabilities? Now, of course, my position is that your capability in the psi arena, across the board, if you will, is just like your physical ability. As fast as I'm going to run, I'm never going to do a 4-minute mile, but by practicing, we can get better. Mm-hmm. You have a great experience as an artist. How people are. I have trouble with stick people and rulers trying to draw things. I could never do what you do. I really admire people who have that capability. Of course, Jimmy was one. And so the psychic capability, I think, is just like any other capability, be it mental acuity or physical capabilities and that. Everybody has some, and it's on a spectrum. Mm. And some people have these things and have much more control. You get mediums and things like that. Some of the big questions are, is this genetic? And there are people trying to look at those sorts of things. Or why is it that it appears in lineage within in family chains, and then others. One I happen to like at the moment is Susan Gaisman. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's a medium, has done a number of books. She's written up in Reality Denied. And what's unique about her is, she had a total military career. She's literally a retired commander in her own right, and had been executive officer for the Chief of Naval Operations and for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So had been operated, and happened to be a guy that I know that we had crossed paths earlier, but never had an inkling of anything like this. After she retired, she'd remarried and married a naval captain, and his daughter, who was in the Marine Corps, is walking across the tarmac in San Diego and gets hit by lightning and killed.
Wow.
And then she has now become an extremely adept medium. And so this is one where entire life, there's nothing that would lead you in this direction. And all of a sudden you see a shift. You have others, like the one that I mentioned there, was a good friend of mine, Ann Gaiman, who, like us, but all her life had to have these experiences. So a lot of questions about why isn't certain things happen, like in one entire life, and so a capability that you would expect to expand, and the other one just serendipitously out of the blue has this and has now become a way of life for her.
Yeah, the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, who talks about the principles of yoga, but he talks about the powers. You'd know that. And he says the same thing, that it seems some people are born and some can gain it through meditation, and they can cultivate it. But
so portals.
Yeah. The portal idea, I was just wondering, have you sort of got any ideas about that, like a feeling of connection from the back of the head, which, I mean, for me, it's the visual mind, it's the complex where the subconscious is, the cerebellum and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind, though, has to do with the conundrum or the brain-mind duality. Are they the same or not? I come from the schools as no. The brain and the mind are separate. The mind is much bigger, is totally interconnected, and that the brain is a mediator, if you will, that translates and moves signals and all of that. Yeah, all of these things. My school of thought comes from, the oneness, a total interconnection of the universe. Even now, one of the things more and more are being talked about, folks that even accept the possibility, is that consciousness is fundamental, and that physical arises from pure consciousness.
Yes. I totally agree. And I talked to Dr. Moody in a video conference, and he said the same thing, that he sees all of it as a construct of consciousness, as sort of a virtual thing, and about the mind being. He even said, he says he doesn't even know if there is such a thing as brains, and I get the point. I suppose in my book I'm trying to make it practical. Here's some great stories that I've experienced and others have experienced, and here's some ways to approach this if you've never felt this, or if you felt it once, you want to feel it again, how to get into it.
Well, no, I assume you're talking nonfiction.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, are you going to do what you were just describing, a series of vignettes about real events that happen, and then transition that to teaching points of some kind? Or
Yes.
are you going to lay out the teaching points, or are you going to let the person, extrapolate on their own?
No, I'm going to make it quite practical. When I started writing, I've written other things before, but I was sort of writing it quite autobiographical. And Lisa said, this is more for people who are really well known. It might be hard to get this published if it's just about you, and you've got so much to offer. Why don't you make it much more practical? And I realised it's a good idea. I'm setting up a YouTube channel, and I'll teach these things as videos as well. But in the book, I've got first chapters about immortality. I talk about near-death experiences and about possibility of reincarnation. And then, interestingly enough, you might have heard this, I give some yoga practices. One's an asana. I practice Iyengar yoga, which is a hatha physical sort of yoga. And we've got a pose called corpse pose, which is shavasana. And it's usually done as sort of a warm down, but an older, amazing yogi told me one day, he says, it's not just to have a lie down at the end. He says, this is a much more profound asana than all that stretching. He said, this is where you connect with beyond death, and the way the teachers would teach us, we'd sort of lie there and they'd say, well, start between your eyes, third eye for want of a better word, but fall back through your head, and just keep coming back and back and back. And remember at the time I thought, oh, this is like what we do in Kung Fu.
We think you're familiar, I'm sure, with the chakra systems and all that.
Yeah.
Of course, the crown chakra is above the head.
Well, that's it. For me, this is all, lots of new things are coming to me, and that's great that you mentioned that, because I've been looking at pictures of halos, and the halo looks to me like my idea of the portal, which is not a literal hole in your head. It's a virtual thing, but like that, that crown chakra, that makes sense. I would love to talk to you all day, but I
feel free. I'm in good shape, man. Actually went out and exercised before this, so totally open-ended.
Yeah. It's going to show
you.
Yeah. I met him 25 years ago at a shopping centre, and I was standing beside this, fine-looking, obviously an Israeli. To me, I'm pretty good at picking people's nationality, and we were watching this girl doing this incredible juggling, and we were just digging it together, and when we started chatting, I said, where are you from, mate? And he goes, oh, just come over from England, Oh, yeah. You really look like somebody. I'm trying to think who it is. And you look like that guy, Uri Geller, actually. And he said, yeah, that's because I am. Really? I said, I've always liked you, I've never bent a spoon in my life, but I've always been a believer, and it was just two guys, and we got on fine. And over the years, I just, if I find an article in an old book or a magazine, I send it to him. He likes to keep a catalogue of stuff where people have mentioned him, pro or con. And
well, in the book, I talk about some of the more unusual articles, and if you can see this thing right up here, those are bent spoons.
Well, let's have a look. I've got my little head there. Oh yeah, that's great.
But one of those is actually one that he bent in the U.S. Capitol itself, where he's holding it like this, and he came down, and I'm sitting about as close as I am, a little bit farther than I am to the screen here, because I expected this to happen, or something would happen. And the important thing is that he was in the Capitol to talk about the plight of the Soviet Jews. This was still the bad old days, and people wanted to immigrate to Israel and whatnot. And everybody said, bend something, and he said, well, I've got to bend. And we were in a skiff, and they literally went out of the guard, and so the spoon came out of the guard's coffee cup, which is important because that means nope, there was no preparation. There's no way he had magic juice on it or anything like that. And instead of an item here, but what he did not do is this. In other words, above and below and whatnot. He had came on a spoon like this, and this thing bent up. And then he put it on the back of a chair, and it continued to bend. And then it fell and ended up in my pocket.
Yeah. Is it one of those ones up there?
Yeah, well, it's one of those up there. Well, there's a number of them that different stories go with, but that is the one from the U.S. Capitol.
Wow, that's legendary. And old Clint Eastwood is quoted on Uri's website as saying he bent a key for him, and then Clint noticed the key kept bending all the way home.
But,
and he couldn't use it to get in his door. So I don't know if he really was his front door key, but yeah, people like you and Clint, I just think, well, if these guys reckon it's true, then it's true. I don't go, oh no, they're all in on the conspiracy. It's obviously true, and I haven't met Uri face to face since then, but he wrote to me about a year ago. And
well, there is a movie that he talks about the secret life of Uri Geller.
Right.
You can find it. Yeah, I'm in that.
Yeah, well, I'll have to see that. Where could I catch that?
I think it's on the internet now.
All right.
Just YouTube or something.
Yeah, legendary stuff. It's so inspiring, isn't it? It's like Bruce Lee or Muhammad Ali or those people you watch them, you think, yeah, I want to be like that, or Arnold Schwarzenegger. But see Uri doing stuff and it's like, yeah, I want to do that. I've never been. I had a friend. I won't say his name, but he's one of the guys very influential. Kung Fu, and he's got an ability. That's what I meant to talk about. Psychokinesis. He told me that when he was a child, he saw Uri Geller on TV, and he went to school and he started making people's watches go backwards.
Yeah.
And then everyone was freaked out. So everyone in the school was bringing him watch, make it, do it. And then I think he could bend spoons too, but his parents ended up taking him to the priest, and I don't know if he had an exorcism or something, but it was that type of thing where it freaked him out. When I first met him, this is after I've been doing Wing Chun for several years, and I must admit, I had a bit of the macho still in me, and I remember looking at him, and he was sort of I'm 6 foot, sort of fairly solid. He was like, 5'7", a little bit pudgy, looked like a clerical guy, and I'd heard that he was this incredible Wing Chun guy, and I'm thinking, doesn't really look like it, But he says to me, I'll show you something. So we got 5 of those pads, those punch mitts. So we got 5 of those, and he got me to hold them, like this. Sort of, I'm holding these mitts, so there's quite a bit of air between them. And he says, now, most people, they would punch it like this, and he just, boom, gives it, and I get a bit of a push. He says, well, that's not going to do much, is it? He says, but I do it like this. And all I saw him do was like really lightly close his hand. And then he didn't seem to really move. He went like that, and bang, I got hit on the spine, felt like a hammer. It's really hard. It was like, boom. And I looked at him, I said, that's telekinesis. He says, no, I wouldn't call it that. He says, I just put my mind in a very fine point in your spine and sent the energy there. And I said, yeah. That's telekinesis, man. I said, these things are hardly touching each other. Just a little tiny bit of leather between them. How could that force go through there? I didn't feel anything. I said, do it again. So this time it's even harder. And another time he tapped me. He's doing it to a few people, but he just came up and went like that, literally like that. And I stepped away. I thought, oh, that wasn't much. And then it was like, oh. and right inside, it's like a little mini grenade went off, and the pain sort of radiated from inside, and it throbbed for about a minute. And thinking of your story about Dim Mak, we don't have a Dim Mak tradition as such that I know of. I suspect there's a lot of things that aren't told to people unless they're really on the inner. But we have a thing called Po Pai, which is when we practice our wooden dummy form, we have this double-handed, where am I? Sort of like this, one hand up, one hand down, like that. So we step in. It just looks like a double-handed, sort of a body shove. Well, my teacher told me, he says, this is called Po Pai, and the Chinese master told him this is called the Wing Chun Death Strike. And when this is done properly, your mind force goes in, which we call Nimlik, and splits their spinal cord. So it's a sort of a vector of force goes in and up the spine, and the other one goes down. So it's like, and that's the end of it.
Well, when I was with Tohei, their little old Japanese thing, and the move was, I don't know if you saw that, but that was the entire move, and knocked me on my ass. I mean, I hit the floor and said, "What was that?" I think I want to find out how you do that one.
Yeah,
there was no slam or anything. It was just projection of ki.
Isn't it wonderful? It's really so, for us Westerners, it's so exciting to find that the boring limits are not really there. We've just been told that. No, that's all people know.
In the snippets kind of things, I think everybody does. It's somewhat telepathic or precognitive, or both. Had tremendous time shifts and things like that. Just I tend to be more of the catalyst than the one actually. My wife, as if you read this whole section on Brazil and Umbanda ceremonies and the various things that we're at. Like I say, a lot of it happens around me as opposed to me. Although with the PK stuff, we learned how to. There's a guy by the name of Jack Houck, whom I mentioned in there. Jack was an aerospace engineer with McDonnell Douglas, and he's the one who developed the technique based on Uri, where you could actually teach metal bending.
Right, the what do you call it? PK parties? Is it?
Well, he calls it PKMB, or Psychokinesis metal bending.
I was reading about the parties that you have, and I'm looking forward to the end of the book, end of your book, where you sort of teach how to have a spoon bending party. I'm definitely going to get my Kung Fu students. We're going to do that.
Yeah. No, I had quite a few, and I mean, when I get to, if I'm going to bottom line all of this, it's the why. In there, I talk about John of God, for instance, the Brazilian, and I say there's a room that he has there that's full of crutches and various kind of constraints and things that people have left, wheelchairs and whatnot. And then last time we were there, he'd always been famous, but now people were coming literally by the thousands, and in busloads, the tour buses would come in. My point was that everybody who came in a wheelchair left in a wheelchair. And yet there's others where we had these phenomenal healings that take place.
What was the one about the lady who does ballet? Remember, is in your book about a lady who was a paraplegic, and she something happened, she got up and started doing ballet?
Yeah, no, that was an NDE case that happened spontaneously where they had, I met her in New York, and she had been literally sent to the morgue. She was a medical basket case before that.
Yeah.
And woke up and got off the gurney and started.
Blew my mind.
But the question is, now the other problem we have, particularly with NDEs, we only talk to the survivors.
Yeah.
We don't talk to the folks who continue on the journey. Yeah. But the area that's interesting to me now that started to emerge is what they call shared death experiences, where you have people who, often the one continues, but the people who are aware of the circumstances around it. I just got a case literally yesterday. The guy does not want to be identified because he's pretty well known, I guess, professional. But anyway, he had this near-death experience, and he came back and he said, well, the message is, don't worry, I was with Dad, his father. And what was unique about that is nobody knew that his father had died.
Wow.
And, he didn't know it. I mean, other than meeting him on the other side, they had died very, very close together, but in different locations, and the information had not transferred. And I find those cases really intriguing. And there's not a lot of them, but there are some.
Yeah.
Well, in Eben's case, he talks about the butterfly that was out there and turned out to be his sister that he had never met.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I love that whole earthworm thing. And
yeah, well, Eben was adopted, and then his biological parents married and had more kids, but he didn't know them. There had been no connection with the family. And he had a biological sister who had died, but he had never known her or of her. And then sees the picture and says, wow, that's the butterfly that escorted him.
Life just seems to get more magical all the time, doesn't it? The more you learn and know, you think, wow, this is really not what I thought it was.
Well, the other case that I used, many, but Mary Neal, and she's the kayaker.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, underwater for 30 minutes. And
I saw her on the TV, there's a new show about.
Yeah, she was just on recently, but they did not get into some of the more miraculous things that happened. Yes, you have her survive and get out. I think it's important because you could not hold your breath for 30 minutes or whatnot. Right. So there's no doubt about that. But two guys show up. They're out in the wilderness and take her to a waiting ambulance. And there are no ambulances in that area of Chile.
Yeah.
I mean, so you have literally, well, in fact, another part of it was that a rock suddenly appears out there, so they get to it, and the rock had not been there previously. Wow. So you're talking a whole series of physical miracles that are going on.
You're talking about angels, aren't you?
Yeah.
Messengers.
Well, that's her take. I mean, these guys were physical, young Chilean male, but then they went back looking for them. After she's healed and can walk again, they go back looking for them, and it's a fairly small area, and the villagers just told her, no, there's no such people here.
Isn't that?
And she now attributes that to literally angels.
Yeah. No, what an incredible story.
That's always interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's very interesting for me. I sort of wanted to get your take on what this really is. That notion of well, you know, they talk a lot about holographic universe, but the idea of this being a simulation, a construct,
Yeah.
for me, I sort of come to the point where I think it's a quantum construct of light. That's all one thing, as you said, all is one super being that we are, but we're the parts of it as well and all that. But could you tell me how you think about what existence is?
Well, that's funny. My wife brought that up earlier today. That the construct is not new. When you go back to Plato and Maya and whole construction. The flip side, when Einstein says, yes, it's an illusion, but a very persistent one. And, look at these constant conundrum, like, if I cut myself, I feel pain. If it's an illusion, how do I feel pain? And
why does it hurt so much?
yeah. I'm literally drafting a paper at the moment. I'm struggling with it a bit. And it's called Who Were You? And I've been doing a lot of writing in the political arena, and I'm vehemently anti-Trump, and thought that was the greatest strategic blunder the country has ever made. And people go like, at my age, why do I care about that? I said, well, as a reincarnationist, we're going to have to come back and fix this mess. And that bothers me as to, what can we do to mitigate the mess for, if we are, I think, likely to incarnate. I kind of jokingly say I would take New Zealand, I think, as an ideal place, but I'm not sure that's where the challenges are. But what I'm trying to address is, and working with mediums, and most of them talk about, the folks who have departed, and this, like Suzanne Guzman that I mentioned, where they look for evidence, to physically support the thing. You ever heard of Chico Xavier?
No.
Okay. He was a Brazilian, has since died. You can find movies about his life, which was absolutely tragic, and yet became a phenomenal medium. He wrote 300 or 400 books that were psychographs that were all, he says, I didn't write these were all dictated. And point here is the University of Sao Paulo. He was very well known, got to the point of having his own television program. And if you look the movie up, you can find it. Huh?
What was he?
Chico Xavier. But if you Google him, you can literally find a movie of his life. And at the end of the movie, they actually have video clips of him. But the point was that he was channeling real people. And so by the way, at one point, he actually got sued by the family of the deceased individual who was saying this was copyright infringement because the right should have gone to the discarded entity who had done it. But anyway, they did a study, they had an individual where they had a number of known papers that were written by him at the time. And then they compared the channeled information and said they came out with 98% accurate, and the other 2%, they just, the point was the other 2% they couldn't verify.
Isn't that right?
That was it. Now, what I'm interested in is the other aspect of it, and that is, can we do pre-incarnate and find the folks that are coming and try to facilitate there. Now, in the movies, this has been done. The X-Men and all of that. Really gather them together and try to facilitate the skills and all. But yeah, I'm just wondering about, but I think we've made a horrible mess. Yeah, we're going to have to clean it up.
Yeah, it sort of tends to be after every 4 years or something, the different presidents have done things, but But I think I never, having grown up a Christian, I never believed in reincarnation, but once I got into yoga and opened my mind up, I was open to it. I never felt any kind of connection personally to past lives. And I had two unusual experiences. One I'm writing about in the book where I was talking about Shavasana, the corpse pose. Literally the first time I ever did that, I was very green in my yoga, but I entered this state as I went back into the rear of my brain into this corpse pose. I sort of lost who I was, and I was on a funeral pyre, like in a forest, this massive blazing fire. And I looked to my side, and there was a big man with a red hair and red beard, naked, holding a torch. And I knew it was my brother. And then I looked down near my feet, and there was all these young women with long brown hair wearing these really simple, baggy clothes. They're all sort of, quite young. And I thought, are they my sisters or my wives? And I could tell they were pretty distressed. And the forest was really Scandinavian. I could tell this guy looked Scandinavian, but the forest was all, covered in moss and lichen and massive fir trees. And the funny thing is I'm just lying there, but it's like I'm in this place, and I look at my rib cage, and I can see all the flesh burning off, it going black, and all this smoke coming off my body, and it's just pouring up. And I remember thinking, well, there's nothing left for me here. So I just went up with the smoke. So I went up with the smoke, and it was very overcast. It was sort of just on night, I guess. And I went up into these clouds, and then it was just black. And I lay there, and there was just nothing. And it seemed quite a long time. And something told me I wasn't allowed to see what was going on there. And then next thing I was in a tiny, super fine, like an atom thick whirlwind, and I was racing through this forest, and it was daylight, and I came across this pile of logs and grass and stuff, and I realized it was sort of like a little tiny hut. And I went inside, and there was a girl, heavily pregnant young girl. I remember how she had really blonde hair, but she was like panting and about to give birth. And I went down and into the birth canal, and then I was lying there, and I was a little baby, and that's how
pretty dramatic.
Yeah, it was just like a movie or something, but I came to lying on the yoga mat and going, wow. And I told the yoga teacher, and she goes, I've been doing yoga for 30 years. I've never had anything like that. Why do you have things like that? And I said, I don't know. It just happened. I didn't know what I was doing. I just did what you said, went back into the rear of my brain. Somehow I become a dead body. And whether that was really me or it was a vision of somebody else's life, I don't know.
Well, reincarnation was in Christianity up until I think it was 633 when it was voted out in conclave in Constantinople.
Okay.
One of the things I've wondered about, do you have much contact with the indigenous folks?
I've had some quite wonderful experiences. I remember when I was a kid, this boy came down from right up in the north, and he was a real traditional Aboriginal boy. He's same age as me, 12, but he was as quiet as a mouse. And for a week he lived in my room. We used to hang around together, but he'd never say a word. And I'm talkative, and it's like, I can't get this kid to talk. And so the last night we're sitting in the room, he's dead quiet as usual, and I must have been quiet too. And then suddenly he just starts speaking, and he talked nonstop for a couple of hours. Just it took him a week to decide, okay, this guy's all right. And he told me
Yeah.
all about his life and, you know, hunting and you know, the games they'd play as kids in the bush and catching fish and that when you meet the Aboriginal people from the bush, they've got a definite, you can feel this energy from the spiritual energy. It's like an unsaid thing, but it's almost telepathic. And because I'm sensitive, I guess I always get on really well with them. Years later, I went to the outback and I had a sort of an Aboriginal spiritual experience out there where I was lying, just about to go to sleep in a bus. And I'm looking at we're out in the middle of nowhere. Like the Australian outback is so deserted. It's like Mars. It's enormous. And
people do not realize, particularly Americans, have no idea how big Australia is.
Yeah, and there's just nothing. It's just the bush. It's just trees and soil and kangaroos and snakes, and it's great. You know, if you want to get away from people, this is the place to come. But I'm lying out there in the middle of Australia, and on the black ceiling of the bus, I just suddenly get this like a vision of a real old Aboriginal fella with a beard, wild sort of curly white hair, bare-chested, hairy chest, and he's got these old green pants tied with a rope, and he's barefoot, and he's doing this dance, and he's just stepping like this, but he's coming towards me. His palms, he's going like this to me, like that, and I instantly knew what he was saying, which was, don't go treating this trip as just a trip. This is a sort of not an initiation, but this is a special journey for you. It's a gift for you. And I kept on getting these. That was the only sort of vision I had, but I kept on meeting Aboriginal people who gave me sort of gifts, like one old fella, Patrick. He wasn't that old. He's probably about 35, but he's really beat up. He'd been in a fight with somebody, and he was as happy as Larry about everything. And he said to me, "Yeah, my name's Patrick Ingamulla." He says, he's from the tribe that's lived around Uluru for, you know, thousands and thousands of years. He says, "You know what you are, David." He says, "You're a Jilby." And I said, "What's a Jilby?"
Okay.
He says, "Oh, you're an elder." He says, "You know, a Jilby's 40. You know, when you get to 40, you're an elder." He says, "But you have something." He says, "You're an elder. You know, you have that place in society." And then that was the last I saw him, and he asked me to come and visit if I ever came out. I never got back, but that whole 3-week journey, we were sleeping on the ground, cooking on fires, you know, flies up your nose all day. It was really, we weren't like tourists in air conditioning. We were out in the heat, and it was a wonderful thing. And I did a lot of art, a lot of drawing. And when I came back to the city, I felt like somehow I brought the outback with me. And there's definitely there's a spirit of this land that the Aboriginal people represent that's much deeper than European people understand. They've got something that we maybe have, but we've lost it. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I'm about to lose light. I see the sun is setting.
Yeah. Well, we've talked for an hour and 3/4, so.
Well, it's certainly been interesting.
Yeah, it certainly has. Thanks so much. I've really enjoyed listening to you and talking to you. And
feel free to set it up again if you wish.
Yeah, I'd be delighted.
Would like to know where you go with the book, or if we can help. Let me know.